Kill Notice. By Dragon Gate 4. Converted to audiobook by ARandomAudiobookAppeared. Genre, fantasy/adventure. Words, 53,947. Rating, T. Status, complete. Summary, Tieras, a banished Elven prince, must protect Ted Lawrence and his daughter Dani from fairies following the kill notice given by the Winter Queen of Faerie. With the help of his Incubus best friend Dijiraeli and wealthy sorcerer Damien Van Wallaver, they just might live long enough to discover something amazing about young Dani and reshape the politics of Faerie itself. Chapter 1. I woke up with a pounding head, a desire to just die already, and the knowledge I had done something idiotic last night and just didn't know what it was yet. I would know soon, I was sure of that. I felt someone move next to me. Crap, who had I brought home last night? I checked myself over with my hands, but far as I can tell, nobody had rode the horsey last night. The snuffling snort next to me, and the hands that were sneaking their way underneath me, told me who was next to me. I hadn't brought him home with me. Dijiraeli, out. I sat up and pushed a mound of hair out of my eyes. Next to me, Dijiraeli rolled on his back and yawned. Oh, why? We didn't have sex last night, why do you want to kick me out? I dragged myself out of bed. I needed a haircut, but that didn't do much good even when I got one. The hair would be back at length by morning. Because an elven prince in bed with an incubus looks bad, outcast or not? Who's the outcast again, Tieras? Dijiraeli crawled out of my bed and walked across the room. He checked himself in the mirror, thought for a moment and then snapped his fingers. Instantly he was impeccably dressed in good slacks, a polo shirt, and a leather jacket, with hair done and perfect. If Dijiraeli wasn't my friend, I'd kill him for being able to look that good that easily. Now, I used to be able to do that. My fey magic had worn off long ago, and I had to suffer through the same indignities as any mortal. Like waking up with bad breath, hair that needed something done to it, etc. Dijiraeli waddled out of my bedroom, calling over his shoulder. Well, are you going to dress or what? You're just standing there being naked and yummy. It's not nice. So says the world's only gay incubus. I grabbed clothes out of my dresser and headed for the shower. I'm not the only one. Dijiraeli yelled over the sound of running water as I cleaned up. I was still hungover, but the near boiling hot water helped me put myself back together. Dressed and clean, I walked back out of the shower. I pulled back my long hair into a ponytail until I could get it cut again. Bastard was sitting at my kitchen table drinking coffee and eating scrambled eggs. Hey there, slowpoke. Go to the underworld, you prick. Been there, it's kind of pleasant actually. I made you breakfast. Dijiraeli gestured at the skillet on my stove. There were still some eggs. I dumped everything that was left on another plate and poured coffee from the machine and joined him at the table. Now that you're done getting ready, you probably want to hear why I dropped in. I didn't bring you home last night. I started eating eggs and slurping coffee as Dijiraeli talked. No, actually. I followed you home last night. You were asleep when I crawled in with you. Most people would that creepy, Digi. Luckily, you're an elf. Barely. I took another big gulp of coffee. Tieras, are you saying what I think you're saying? Dijiraeli had shed his normal fun-loving persona. I'm going to a barber today. If my hunch is right, I have only one shot to not have my hair be a mess. You think it won't grow back to length this time? Dijiraeli took a big drink of his coffee and took my cup and his for a refill at the coffee machine. You know what that would mean? Yeah. I took another forkful of eggs and watched Digi. We both know what's happening to me. The longer I'm far from home, far from Faerie, the less elven I become. In other news, I know you don't want to hear this, but your hair, it's well. Dijiraeli reached for my head and yanked out a couple of strands. Ow. Bastard. I jerked away from him. 1. You're feeling pain more than you used to. 2. Look at these hairs. Digi held the brown strands in my face. Brown, they were brown. My hair's getting darker, I've noticed, Dijiraeli. I took another deep drink of the coffee he handed me. This goes much farther, Tieras, and you won't be able to see me, at least as anything but a midnight wraith you aren't sure is really there. I don't think it'll go that far. Her Royal Majesty wouldn't want me to be able to forget what I've lost by defying her. I killed the hot coffee and stood up. I have to go. It's Saturday, you really think Jameson will be at the precinct? It's Jameson, he's always at the precinct. The man doesn't know the definition of a day off. Neither do you, my prince. Don't call me that. Dijiraeli nodded and left my table. I have to head for the village, I have a gentleman there who needs me. I left about 10 minutes after Digi. Was I right? Would my mother let my deterioration go so far that I couldn't even see the shaded world? It was a scary thought. Once you can't see it anymore, the shaded can be very dangerous. Think of a hornet in the room. If you know it's there, wouldn't you rather be able to see it? Knowing about what lurks in the dark, and being unable to see it, was my worst nightmare. I threw one leg over the other as I sat across from Sergeant Jameson's desk. I wasn't bold enough to put my feet on his desk. Jameson was nominally my boss. I say nominally because he learned years ago that tightening the reins on Lane Michaels does no good. Why the fuck are you here today, Michaels? Because I knew you would be here. Go home. There's nothing you can do here today, Lane. I could say the same thing for you, Jameson. We both turned at the loud rap 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 on the frame. Jerry Steels was watching us from the doorway. Neither of you should be here. Charlie, you get Michaels to come in? You know how the city feels about overtime. Lieutenant Jerry Steels had her arms crossed over her chest, and pale blonde hair pulled back high on her head. I'm wary of the other senior leader in homicide, because she's a Mulder. She believes in the shaded world, but belief without ability to see is very, very dangerous. You make yourself a legitimate target by believing in it. He came on his own, Jerry, I didn't get him to come. Both of you, out. This is my day on, your day's off. Steels was a tough woman, staring at her sergeant and one senior detective like we were unruly children. Jameson got up from the desk and gestured grandly. If anything happens, I'll call. Out of here, Charlie. Steels stood and waited for us to actually leave. I pulled my car door shut and paused before turning the ignition key. I wasn't used to being thrown out of the precinct. My jacket lay haphazardly on the 76th Reno's seat. It's not old, it's a classic. Somebody rapped on the window. I rolled it down and Steels leaned herself on my driver's door. Why did you really come in, Michaels? I knew Jameson would be here. Well, he's not now, so neither are you. Go home, or wherever. Steels banged on the roof of my car and walked away towards the precinct. If my mother had chosen someone like that, maybe things would be so different. Ah, Tieras, my son, there's someone you who must simply meet. The Queen gestured grandly. I followed with the dullness of a man who knows his life is not his own and never will be. I followed my mother down the stairs from the family quarters into the summer throne room. Standing next to the throne, away from her own ducal seat, was the Duchess of Midnight, my mother's dear friend from childhood. She gestured to us. Your Royal Majesty, we pay great greetings from the land of midnight to the Queen of Summer. I examined everything with disinterest, then I noticed the heavy chests stacked in the throne room. I had a sinking feeling, that was promptly confirmed when the Duchess stretched her hand out to me. Your Highness, the Queen, and I have been discussing some things. For the price of these jewels and treasures, she has agreed to give me your hand in marriage. I had seen this coming for years, that the Queen would make a reasonable arrangement for me, but I dared to hope that my arranged bride would be a woman my own age. Not my mother's best friend, a woman who had changed my diapers and coddled me as a child. Mother, I can't do this. The Queen looked at me with wide-eyed surprise. Tieras, this is a very advantageous match. Your sister agrees with me, you could not make a better marriage than the Duchess.
well, no, actually, I could. Give me 3 days and I find someone, anyone, better than her grace.
The Duchess was very offended. The Queen was aghast.
Tieras, I'd like to know at what point in your life you got the impression you have a say in anything. I know I don't, but anybody but someone who changed my diapers and frolicked with you as a girl, mother.
Even as I begged to get out of this, I could tell the decision was made and the wheels were starting to turn. I would be married to my mother's best friend whether I liked it or not. The Duchess bowed to my mother and stepped away.
I will give you a chance to figure out your son, your majesty.
Once she was out of the room, the Queen whirled around on me.
How dare you presume that you have any say in your future, Tieras? Mother, I presume nothing. I only beg that I not be wed to a woman so many years my senior. Why does it matter to you? Do you really wish to be wed to some empty-headed young creature your age, Tieras? The Duchess will make a good wife for you, and a proper future queen. Mother, please. I would marry anyone else but someone so much older than me. This arrangement has been made and that is final, Tieras. Your presence is no longer required.
I stood there, watching events move faster than I could stop. There was nothing I could do. I would be wed to a woman thrice my age that had changed my diapers. She would be my queen, and there wasn't a blessed thing I could do about it. I started the Torino and pulled out of the precinct lot. The nearest street corner held somebody I knew. I slowed the car and rolled down my window.
I should arrest you for solicitation, Dani. Hey there, Detective Michaels.
Dani Lawrence, all of 15 years old, opened my door and climbed in.
Would you take me home? I missed the bus again. You knew I would, Dani. How's your dad? He's good, Detective. He's clean and staying out of trouble.
Dani poked at the Torino's radio, couldn't figure how to change off the oldies station and gave up.
Your car is old. It's not old, the Gran Torino is a classic, Dani. Classic. Tahe, whatever.
I stopped in the driveway of the Lawrence house as her father came outside to see who had pulled up. He stiffened when he saw me. Ted Lawrence went into Faerie and came back to the mortal world alive, and has some idea I'm not what I seem. It gives a man a different perspective when he retrieved his own daughter after she was kidnapped by fairies as a changeling. And he's also a small-time crook and con man. Ted walked outside, towards the Torino.
Detective. Mr. Lawrence.
He hides his eyes behind dark glasses. Crossing the line into Faerie to retrieve his daughter turned Ted Lawrence's eyes silver with unusable magic he can't get rid of.
Dani was walking home and waved me down for a ride. Thanks for bringing her home.
Ted gestured Dani to him as she climbed out of the Torino and trotted for the house. Ted approached my car and leaned on it, his hands on the hood. Once Dani was in the house, he started talking.
I've been thinking about this for a while, and I think I know what you are. What do you think you know?
Ted pushed off the car, and said very seriously.
You're an elf. But you've been away from Faerie for too long, and so you're dying.
Well, he was almost on the target. I laughed.
You're crazy, Mr. Lawrence, really. I'm just a homicide detective.
I started the Gran Torino's engine and pulled away from the Lawrence house. Ted Lawrence knew quite a bit, but not enough. If I were a lot of other elves I know, he'd be dead, and his daughter would be dragged off to Faerie to be somebody's bride. Probably my own. But I'm basically powerless, a decade and some banished from Faerie. I drove off, opening up the Torino's engine. It's been 15 years since I was banished, by human reckoning. I pulled up at my barber and parked the Torino. I let myself take a good look in the mirror. My hair had started out long, thin, pale, but tough. Its growth had slowed each time I was forced to cut it, it was getting thicker and darker. My eyes had faded from elven ice blue to a more common dirty blue/hazel. I pulled myself out of the car, wondering just how far the Queen would let this go.
I would rather be banished from the land of Faerie itself. I will never marry her, I will never be a husband to her, mother.
I had fought, argued, cajoled, and all of it was on deaf ears. The Summer Queen refused to terminate my upcoming marriage, and the ceremony was tomorrow.
Do you really mean that, Prince Tieras? I swear my life on it. I would rather be banished than marry the Duchess.
The Queen reared back on her heels and then yanked the jeweled chain from my throat.
You have done nothing but whine about a very advantageous marriage to a dear friend of mine. If that's what you want, it's what you'll have. You are banished, Tieras, to the human realm. We'll see how long you last before you beg to come home and become a proper husband to the Duchess.
Never, ever say anything you don't mean to an elf. She banished me, and 15 years and I still haven't cried uncle. The bell rang as I walked into the barber shop.
Hey there, Turo.
The friendly old dwarf turned to me and grinned. Only because I'm an outcast, otherwise we'd have the old problem of elves and dwarves.
Tieras, haircut again.
I yanked the ponytail holder out of my hair and let the light brown stuff fall.
Yeah, you probably pay more attention to my hair than anybody, Turo.
He knew. The dwarf took a walk around me and nodded.
How short do you want it? This time, isn't going to pop back by morning. I figured that. Just put me in police regulation.
I put my hand over my face as I said it. 15 years, I had spent the past 10 of those as a cop, the first 7 I had used glamours to make myself look like I was in regulation. Then, my ability to glamour had failed me, and I started hacking my hair every morning, knowing it would be mid-back length by nightfall. Now, I knew if I got it properly cut, it would not grow back fast, and it would grow in darker. I sat down in the chair and held still as Turo wet down my hair and brushed it out, then started cutting. I didn't want anyone I knew to see this. Which was why, as far as I could tell, that Dijiraeli came in and plopped himself down in the waiting area, watching with undisguised amusement as my long hair was cut again, this time for what could be functionally permanent, considering it would take forever at a human pace to grow it back as long as it was.
You, not a word.
The Incubus raised his hands innocently, at least as much as he could do anything innocently.
Not saying a word, but I have to say, the hair is actually looking good on you.
I tried to check and Turo wrapped my shoulder.
If you want this even, hold still.
I held still as he continued to cut, then grabbed an electric razor for the back of my neck. Dijiraeli watched throughout the procedure, obviously amused. Deep down, sometimes, I worry that Digi is just waiting for the day I can no longer see the shaded world, then he'll do what he obviously wants to. Digi swears he doesn't want me that way, and I believe him as long as I can see him, but I just don't know if it would hold once I can no longer see the shaded. Turo ripped off the tapes of the cover and stepped back.
There you go. Another year, and...
I interrupted him, looking at myself in the mirror.
I'll be basically human.
Still, I had things to do. I looked at Digi, who had put down the Vogue he was reading.
I need your help with something. Call the police. I'm asking you.
Dijiraeli walked towards my car on the curb. I paid Turo and followed. Outside, he was already in my car.
What do you want? The Lawrences. I understand you know them. Kind of. I helped Ted Lawrence get his daughter back not long after I was banished. I hadn't got out of Faerie yet and we ran into each other, and I helped him survive traveling in Faerie and get his daughter back. You know he's the holder of Sendalus, and carries a touch of unusable magic? Yes, is that important?
Where the hell was Dijiraeli going with this?
Ted Lawrence has a kill notice on his head from the Winter Queen, and the Winter Prince has sworn his intentions to wed Dani Lawrence. After all this time? My god, they're slow. They're winter, Tieras. They don't work fast. Anything from my mother. The summer court is being quiet about all this. Naturally.
I got in the Torino and started the engine. Dijiraeli was sprawled in my passenger seat.
Seat belts.
As I peeled off, Digi buckled himself in. We parked halfway up the block to watch the Lawrence house. Digi was paying more attention to me than the house.
Did he ever realize that I helped him? No, 15 years ago I looked different. Much more elven. The last time he saw me without a glamour was when I first came to the mortal world, and now since I don't need one. He's mowing the lawn in boxers shorts, a wife-beater, and a bathrobe. This is the guy that wielded Sendalus against the Winter Court to get his daughter back. Hard to believe, but I've learned in the past 15 years to never underestimate humans, Digi.
I got out of the Torino and slammed my door shut. Digi waved at me and indicated he was perfectly happy, in my car. Ted Lawrence turned off the lawnmower and walked up to me.
Detective. Mr. Lawrence, we need to talk. Mind if I come inside?
As he warily nodded and turned away, I followed him into the house.
Come with me if you want to live.
I wheeled my horse around, facing the confused man, gripping tightly to a magic blade he didn't even know how to use. I was on my way out, given a day to get out of Faerie before my own mother would put a kill notice on me. But this man was in much deeper trouble than me. He put up a hand and grabbed at some way to mount up with me. I grabbed his arm and yanked him up easily, slinging him up behind me in Palawa's saddle. Behind us, summer court guards were in hot pursuit. I dug my heels in Palawa's side and galloped off. As we tore across the land of Faerie, I called back to my passenger.
Why by the old magics are you here? My daughter.
He was obviously not too proud to hold on, having slung his arms around my waist and held on for dear life as Palawas galloped at full stride. His grip was tight enough to choke my much smaller elven frame.
She was taken?
I checked behind us, and it looked like the guards had given up. After the next hillock, I'd rein up Palawas and slow down.
By elves. They broke in the middle of the night, killed my wife, and kidnapped my daughter Dani.
He looked green as Palawas thundered over the next hill. Nothing runs as fast as an elvish mount with a good rider.
That's not something the summer court would do. Why by the old magics did you come to our side of Faerie?
The man shrugged, and then tightened his grip as Palawas jumped a log.
Your castle was closer.
I knew I should let him off relatively close to the Winter Court's land and let him run off to get killed. And yet, I was banished, this could be fun, and I wasn't passing up the chance to take the piss out of the fairies.
I'll take you to the Winter Court. If anyone kidnapped your daughter and murdered your wife, it was them.
I reined up Palawas and brought him down to a walk. We soon dismounted and I led my horse as we walked across the green grass of Faerie. Ted Lawrence offered me coffee, I took the cup and drained it. Sendalus was still in the place I had told him to put it 15 years ago, proudly mounted above the mantel of the faux fireplace. Ted and Dani could see it because they had gone into Faerie, dined upon its fruits and walked away alive. I could see it because I was still a little bit elf, and anybody else able to was cause for concern.
What can I do for you, detective?
He was wary. The last time I had wanted a sit-down with him had involved his wife's murder, 7 years cold in my first case as a homicide detective after another person had turned up dead in the same inexplicable fashion. Of course, I had slaughtered the Winter Court assassin that had killed both victims, but the cases were officially cold.
Remember that talk we had when I dropped Dani off? Yeah. You're right.
I held out my empty cup and Dani took it from me and went to the kitchen. Lawrence cautiously removed his glasses, showing his silver eyes.
So you're dying? No, just becoming more human. The Winter Court wants you dead.
I left out the part about the prince's matrimonial intentions towards Dani. Lawrence rubbed the bridge of his nose.
What can I do?
The door opened and Digi walked in. He gave everything an appraising look, then his eyes fell on the sword on the wall.
So that's Sendalus. I'm impressed, takes balls to display it like that.
Lawrence looked at me.
He's good, kind of. You can trust him, just don't fall asleep around him.
Dijiraeli bowed grandly.
Dijiraeli outer Masasir, at your service. He's a gay incubus.
I waved off Digi and took the coffee Dani brought me. Lawrence reached for his daughter.
Dani, you should join us.
She sat down and looked between both me and Digi. Her eyes are elven blue, but I can tell she's human.
No, she shouldn't. This is Dani's business, too. It's her they want.
Digi gave me a look.
Dani deserves to know, Tieras.
Lawrence blinked, and I knew what he was thinking of.
My name is Tieras, son of ARandomAudiobookAppeared, Prince of the Summer Court. And you are?
I was dishing up camp food, while Palawas grazed on the grass. The castle in any pursuit was miles behind us.
Lawrence, Ted Lawrence. I'm trying to find my daughter, before I won't be able to bring her back. Oh, that won't happen.
I shoved a bowl of stew at Ted Lawrence and dished my own.
The longer you and she are here, all the more of the magic of Faerie will become part of you. You'll be able to leave without a problem, but you won't be the same. Neither of you will. As long as I can bring her home, what do you want called? Tieras is fine. I've been banished for defying the Summer Queen's will. Ted, call me Ted.
He took a spoonful and promptly gagged.
Oh my god, you can't cook.
After trying my own bowl, I was forced to agree with him. I made a face and cursed Digi for using my real name. Lawrence laid back on his couch.
So it is you. A cop, why'd you become a cop? It kind of happened.
The sequence of events that led to me becoming a cop are too boring and confusing to get into here.
Lane Michaels is a name on some paperwork. I'm off today, I'm Tieras. I want to help you, again.
Ted nodded.
What can I do? You and Dani need to go somewhere protected. I have iron bullets back at my house for my service pistol. That should help if the Winter Court comes after us, but it's a stopgap at best.
Ted gestured to the hallway.
Dani, pack yourself some clothes.
She galloped off to her room. I looked at Ted.
Did you ever figure out why they wanted Dani? No, I talked to both sides of the family. But Mona's family.
He looked away. Ted has been investigated for his wife's murder and exonerated. Mona Brady Lawrence's parents still believed their son-in-law had murdered their daughter and gotten away with it. Naturally, he couldn't tell anyone that Fairies had killed his wife and kidnapped his daughter, and he had gone to Faerie to get the girl back. Unless spending his life in a hospital for the criminally insane was on his bucket list.
I see. Get yourself some clothes, you and Dani are coming back to my place. Digi. I'll be there, bro.
I waited while the Lawrences packed their bags and threw them in the Torino's trunk. A car slowed down and stopped by the broken concrete curb. Patrolman Brandt got out, swinging his cuffs.
I have to bring you in for questioning, Lawrence.
I gave him, Ted, a sharp glare. Brandt nodded at me.
Detective Michaels, I suppose you're here over the same thing I am. No, actually, it's something else.
There was nothing I could do, and I gave Ted dark looks as Brandt arrested him for a numbers scheme. As he was being guided into the back seat of the prowl car, I called after him.
You'll be perfectly safe in a jail cell, I'll take Dani.
I didn't get a response. Dani came outside carrying overnight bags for both of them, and sandalus.
We'll need this, right?
I took the blade from her and swung the scabbard on my back.
Yeah, if the Winter Court comes after you.
The patrol drove off. Brandt didn't have the time to think too much about the fact that Dani had just pretended to hand me something and I had pretended to put it on my back. The weight was reassuring. It had been a long time since I had wielded proper elven weaponry. 15 years and a smidgen. I loaded Dani into the car and tossed the bags into the trunk. Like it or not, protecting her was more important than protecting her father. They only wanted him because long ago they had come for Dani and he had gone through Faerie to get her back.
How dangerous is this? Extremely.
I took my bow off my back and beckoned Ted closer.
If we're captured, you'll be enslaved and I'll be executed, after being viciously tortured. What about Dani?
Ted was frightened now.
They won't hurt her, they went to too much trouble to bring her here. They'd kill or enslave.
Ted whimpered, and I knew he needed something to make him feel like he had a snowball's chance.
Stand up. You're wielding a powerful ensorcelled blade you don't know to use.
I walked Ted through some basic sword drills. We were still screwed, I was pretty sure. As we were practicing, I heard hoofbeats and immediately knocked an arrow.
Riders.
I stopped the Gran Torino and Digi climbed out of the car and folded the seat forward to allow Dani to get out. I had handed Sendalus back to her while I drove, and she clutched the sword tightly as I got the bags out of the car trunk. What should I feed a 15-year-old girl? Dani and Digi had walked on in. Wait a freaking minute.
Dijiraeli, when did you get a key to my house? I'm an incubus. I don't use keys.
I'm so going to be raped once I lose the ability to see the shaded world. In my living room, Digi was making lunch and telling Dani jokes.
What did the ghoul say to the tree?
Dani giggled. For most kids, having a parent being hauled off by cops would be worrisome. To Dani, it was normal.
I don't know, what did he say? I don't know either, why are you asking me?
I groaned.
Your jokes are horrible.
Digi grinned at me.
What do you call a monster with a wooden head?
Dani thought about it and came up blank.
Edward.
I moaned and laid Sendalus on the coffee table.
You suck at jokes.
Digi stuck his tongue out at me, far longer than any tongue had a right to be.
What do you call a monster with 2 wooden heads?
I moaned again.
Edward Woodward. You're spoiling the joke. What do you call a monster with 4 wooden heads? I don't know, but Edward Woodward would.
Digi snorted as he started dishing hamburger and noodles onto plates for the 3 of us.
Smartapants, you've heard my jokes too often. Okay, when does a prince get very wet?
Dani had a moment of brilliance.
When he becomes the reigning monarch.
Dijiraeli grinned and ruffled her hair.
Smart kid. I've got another one for you. What has 6 legs, 4 ears, and a shining suit of armor?
I took my plate and sat down.
A prince on horseback.
Digi cuffed me on the shoulder.
Let the kid answer, I'm telling her jokes.
Dani set her own plate on the kitchen table and Digi joined us.
Now, we have to have a strategy for when the fairies try again. Eventually, we have to return to Faerie and confront the Winter Queen to get them off you and your father's backs once and for all. Right now, I'm just going to protect you while your father is in questioning.
Thanks. Dani started eating the noodles while Digi watched me eat as I kept eating my own food. I would starve if it wasn't for Dijiraeli, quite honestly. Dijiraeli was carrying his own plate as he walked around the house, calling back to us occasionally.
We need to make sure each of these doors and windows are properly secured against the shaded. I was able to walk right in your front door.
Irrationally fuming, I followed his voice and made sure Dani was out of earshot.
Oh, well, forgive me for leaving the house this morning with no idea I was going to be dragged into the affairs of the shaded. Again. You are of the shaded world, my prince. Don't forget that.
He was setting me off. I grabbed a knife of cold iron off my coffee table, kept around after the metal had ceased to be able to hurt me for if I had any problems with my former kinfolk. Dijiraeli bridled from me as I sliced my forearm with the knife, not deep but long. I held up my bloody arm.
Does it look like the shaded world to you? I should be in agony from being cut with cold iron. My blood is red and it should be silver. It hurts, but it's not going to make me sick or kill me. Within a few more years, I won't even see you. You'll never escape it, Tieras. You are an elven prince. Barely.
I laid the blood-stained knife on its rest and held my arm up as I went to the bathroom for some bandages. Dani and Dijiraeli were sitting next to each other eating second helpings of hamburger noodles when I came in dressed in pajamas with my arm bandaged. The sound of tires on the gravel startled us out of watching Big Brother. I stood up and beckoned them to stay back as I slipped to my bedroom and got my service pistol from its gun case. Back in the living room, Digi was on his feet, stiff with anticipation.
What did you hear, Tieras? Tires. What about you? Listen harder.
Digi slid towards the door, loosening his human appearance. I strained my ears, and heard car doors slam.
Car doors. You really are getting dreadfully human. I hear hooves and boots on the gravel. It's a hunter.
I ejected my magazine and confirmed I had a load of staggered cold iron and silver. Jamming the clip back into the gun, I crawled over to Dani and saw she was already on the floor. Smart girl.
Dani, head for my bedroom, get under the bed and don't come out until Digi or me come get you, whatever happens, you got that?
She nodded fearfully and low-crawled for the hallway. I turned around and went back to where Incubus McStupidPants was standing up and looking out the window. I snarled, "Get down!" Just as a blast of metaphysical energy demolished the window and the door. I hunched up to protect myself from flying splinters and crawled towards the couch. Digi threw his own magic back at our attacker, invoking something nasty in the snarling language of the demons. Fucking underworld, I miss my powers. Digi was in a spell off with our attacker, and I used the couch for cover and fired back at the hunter that had came as far as the door. It was the silver bullets that staggered him, as Digi retreated.
We need to get out of her, Ty.
I gave the hunter another load of bullets and went for the bedroom to retrieve Dani. Dijiraeli was trading magic back and forth, and my .40 cal was empty. I dropped the empty magazine and ran for my bedroom. Dani was trying to open the window.
I told you to hide under the bed. Well, it's obvious we need to get out of here, and the front door ain't an option.
I was able to open the window and shoved Dani out of it, then followed her. Digi met us on the lawn as I started the Torino. With all three of us in the car, I stomped it and fled as the hunter leapt on the back of his nightmare and rode after us. It was definitely an unpleasant reminder. My hands were bound and my arms were stretched above my head. I was a prisoner of the Winter Court. This is what happens when your only ally is a human with no training as a swordsman. The Winter Queen walked slowly around me.
What a pleasure this is, to have the son of the Summer Queen at my mercy. My mother won't care what you do to me, I've been banished. I shouldn't even be in Faerie right now. And yet you stop your own flight to help, this.
She gestured contemptuously where Ted was being held firmly in place by two Winter Court fairies. I was one dead elf and just didn't know it yet. If I was lucky, I'd be killed quickly. If not, I would be tortured for hours to satisfy the bloodlust of the fairies.
Thought it'd be fun.
I cried out in pain abruptly when the whip hit my back, hard and sharp enough to cut to the bone. The Winter Queen stepped around me, to the fairy behind me wielding the whip.
Give me that.
The guard handed over the whip and she promptly began to mercilessly beat him with it.
Nobody touches Prince Tieras but me.
When she was done, his back was hamburger and he wasn't moving. I knew I was next. We stopped at the precinct, having shook the hunter. I unloaded Dani and stopped halfway there when Ted Lawrence was coming out.
We were just coming for you.
Ted looked between me, Digi and back to me.
Something happened. Just a wild hunt, nothing to worry about.
I gestured Ted into my car.
We have to get you to somewhere safe.
Ted blinked.
What about your house? Not safe. The hunter barged right in and trashed my front door and living room. Wow, you really are becoming human. Yeah.
I didn't want to talk about the fact that I had heard the hunter's nightmare as a car. I was losing my awareness of the shaded. Digi gave me a look and said nothing. Would he still come around after my ability to see him was gone? We ended at Dijiraeli's apartment. I had never been here, and I was surprised at the rattiness of this place, considering an incubus lived here. As I was clearing the place with flashlight and service pistol, take no chances Lane, they call me at the precinct, I called back to Digi.
Clear. And your place is a dump.
He snorted.
It's not like I bring guys here, Tieras.
Ted gave him a dark look. He probably didn't want a gay incubus talking about such things in front of his teenage daughter.
Right, Digi, let's batten down the hatches and tough it out until morning. Do you have to work tomorrow?
Digi was unfolding the sleeper sofa for the guests.
Yeah, I have to. Go home and get yourself straight. They don't want you, I can protect Ted and Dani.
As bad as I hated to admit it, Digi was right.
Just don't try to get comfy with Ted, okay?
Digi walked me out of his apartment. In the hallway, he grinned.
No promises. Oh, for God's sake, his daughter is in the apartment and she's 15. My hands will be to myself. It won't be fun, though.
I went home. It was unnerving to see that the forces of the shaded, the ones that hide the world from mortal eyes, had already smoothed and blanketed over the magical battle on my front porch. The hoof prints of the hunter's nightmare were all that remained, and only someone who knew what he was looking over would have seen them. It was scary, that was I, and they must hide the shaded world from classification of people. It was late, and I staggered into my house and fell into bed. Morning came too soon. I showered, dressed, and clipped my badge and gun to my belt and headed out the door, chewing on a fruit pastry as I started the Torino's engine and left the house. As I walked into the bullpen, I could almost pretend I hadn't outrun the wild hunter last night, that I wasn't an elf outcast, and that my incubus best friend wasn't safeguarding 2 humans marked for death by the fairies. Sergeant Jameson threw a case file at me as I passed his office.
Michaels. Got a case for you. Some crazy woman murdered down on 83rd Street. Check it out, CSI is already there.
I had my orders, and right now Tieras of the Summer Court had to take a backseat to Detective Lane Michaels. When I walked on the scene, I wanted to turn around. Senior CSI Leslie Kennedy was waiting for me. I had dated her, long ago, back when I was a newly minted detective, and she was a junior CSI, now we were both senior on our sides. Other things had happened while we were dating, and they were things I was still processing many years later. She didn't realize I had given her something while we were dating, that my mother would be very upset if she knew I had given it up. Assuming she didn't already know.
Hey there, Lane. Got some nasty business up in here.
Kennedy gestured me in, and handed me crime scene booties. I slipped them on while she talked.
The victim was decapitated and disemboweled. Ow.
I followed her in after putting on gloves.
The victim was found by her next-door neighbor when the neighbor came in looking to buy some herbs for a tri-location spell. That's what she said, Lane.
I nodded as I stood over the body. Lunara de Gaulle was a local witch and purveyor of magical supplies. I had come to her early in my time in the human world to get the herbs I needed to make food an elf could eat. Now she was dead, and I could guess what was responsible.
Yeah, lots of crazy people who believe in magic. Like Lieutenant Steele's. She insists fantasy creatures are everywhere. She shouldn't.
I walked around the body and noticed the intricately shaped ceremonial blade, laying on the counter stained with blood and other body fluids. Lunara had been murdered by the wild hunter.
Why not? Other than the obvious.
Kennedy was picking up and bagging the knife as evidence, while her underlings dusted for prints.
As long as you don't believe, they can't hurt you.
I kneeled down, careful not to get anything in the blood and ichor around her body. Lunara had believed, had she been able to see her attacker in the dark, coming at her with the cursed blade of the hunter. Or being human, which or not, had she been struggling against something she couldn't see? Kennedy laughed.
Really, that's so? That's so.
I wasn't laughing. Lunara had been a friend, and whether her death had been over me or over the Lawrences, I still felt guilty for it. When the CSI guys were finished, I looked to Kennedy.
I've seen everything I can, you. Yeah, bag 'em up, boys.
The me was turning and examining Lunara's body, while his assistant made notes.
It's a pretty ugly murder, isn't it, Doctor? Somebody hated this woman, Mr. Charles.
As they zipped her up, I muttered an elven blessing for the dead. I had liked Lunara, and I was going to find out why she had been murdered by the hunter. Kennedy gave me a sidelong look.
What did you say, Lane?
I shook my head.
Nothing.
The knife still being present, told me one thing. The wild hunter, and maybe his party, were still on the mortal plane. Back at the station house, I was writing up the report. Lieutenant Steele had propped her lovely hips on my desk and was examining the evidence bag with the knife.
Nasty piece of work. I've never seen anything like it. This inscription, it's odd. LaRue is pretty much the best language man in the entire department and he's stumped. Well, there's lots of languages LaRue doesn't know, Lieutenant.
Truthfully, the knife's inscription was fairy writing. I won't translate it word for word, it's a very vulgar way of saying that he who feels the knife's bite is an enemy of the Fae. She dropped the bagged knife on my desk, making me jump.
Shouldn't this be in evidence lockup, ma'am? I want you to read it. Are we going back to this? You are not what you claim to be.
Steele was in one of her off phases, and people were looking. Jameson caught my eyes and shook his head.
I'm what then, ma'am?
I gave Steele my best put upon homicide detective with a crazy lieutenant look, and she turned around and walked out. I picked up the bagged knife and walked towards the evidence lockup. The knife would be here as long as its wielder was. In the lockup, I turned the knife over in my hand, studying the inscription closer. It had been marked for Lunara, and the hunter could not have used it on anyone else. Did he have more blades with a name on them, like mine for instance? Or Ted and Dani? I checked the knife in properly, forging some signatures to cover Steele's, removing it to shove it in my face, and walked out to go back to Lunara's shop. Jameson hopped up when I was walking out.
I'm going with you. That isn't necessary, Sergeant.
I didn't want him around when I started poking through Lunara's metaphysical implements and interrogating her familiar.
I'm coming.
Jameson picked up his jacket. Then I heard Steele's voice behind us. We both turned, and she was in nice casuals.
I'm going to the crime scene. This one is ugly and I want to have my feet on it if the press ambush us.
There was nothing I could do. I adjusted my gun and badge on my belt and we left. Back at Lunara's shop, her neighbors were watching from outside the police tape as we walked in and ducked under the tape.
So she was a real witch. Thought she was.
I was determined to be the sculliest scully that anyone had ever scullied. I had to defuse Lieutenant Steele's Mulder, before anything of the shaded world decided to act against Steele's on principle. A woman came bustling up to me, grinning widely.
Ah, you.
She put on the brakes when she registered Steele's. She made an admirable show of looking at my waist for the gold shield clipped to my belt.
Detective.
Lunara's sister Leah. Oh God, I didn't want to do this. Despite the smile on her face, I could see the grief in her eyes. She already knew. At least that made my job a little easier.
I'm Detective Michaels, this is Lieutenant Steele's. We're investigating the homicide that happened here. I am Leah DeGaulle, Lunara's sister. What happened to her, Detective?
I wasn't surprised when I heard a witchly whisper in my mind. What happened to my sister, Your Highness? I shook my head slightly. Your sister was killed by the leader of the wild hunt. I don't know why yet, but I will find out and I will banish that fairy bastard back to where he belongs. At the same time, we were having a bland discussion, homicide detective to victim's next of kin.
Your sister was murdered in her shop, probably during a robbery attempt that went horribly wrong, Ms. DeGaulle. I'm so sorry for your loss.
She nodded and addressed me.
Thank you, Detective Michaels.
Steele was giving us both suspicious looks. Leah was being too formal with me and Steele could tell.
The police department can provide you numbers for several crime scene cleanup services once we've released the scene. That would be very nice, Detective.
I walked past her, vowing I would have a real talk with Leah later. Steele stuck to me as I walked back in. The place was still a mess, the floor stained through the linoleum with blood and body fluids. Steele was more interested in the accoutrements Lunara had been selling than the remnants of a murdered witch.
Say, what's this?
She tapped a display case that held different of stones and minerals. I took a distracted look, quickly counting the types. Lunara had a good collection, amethyst, emerald, ruby, quartz, topaz, selenite, all of it real stone and charged with shade energies. I had come to Lunara frequently for magical ingredients before my own magic had failed me.
Dunno.
She sighed as she stepped away from the case. I was watching the floor, the hoofprints of the hunter were visible, pressed into the linoleum. I left Steele's and walked outside. On the small spate of grass outside, I found the nightmare's hoofprints. I knelt down and examined them. The same beast that had been ridden by my house last night, I was absolutely sure.
I want impressions of those tire tracks.
She startled me and I jumped. When my heart slowed down, I looked at her.
Right, impressions.
Thank God she was unable to see the hoofprints of the nightmare. I went back to our unmarked to get the impressions kit. Anybody who didn't know of the shaded would see tire tracks, those who knew would see the impressions of the nightmare's hooves. I was behind my desk, waiting for the Mies results when Digi walked in with the Lawrences. The desk officer was escorting them.
Detective Michaels? These people insist they know you.
I waved the officer away.
Unfortunately, they're telling the truth.
Digi plopped himself down, sitting on my desk. I clicked a pen and said deadpan.
I'm Detective Lane Michaels, how can I help you? Cut the crap, Tieras.
Digi does not get that I use a human name. Well, he gets it, he just likes to aggravate me. Across the room, Steels was listening to us. I wanted to bitch slap Digi, but that would be police brutality.
How can I help you?
I stuck to my story. Digi gave me a look and gave up.
I think I know something about the de Gaulle murder.
Steels wasn't approaching, but she was listening. Please don't say anything shade-related.
All right, if you would sit down in my chairs instead of on my desk, mister.
I had never known Digi to have a human name.
Israel, Mark Israel. Mr. Israel. Please sit down and tell me what you know about Miss de Gaulle's murder. Lenora was murdered by an enemy from her past, and for helping the wrong person.
Having no choice, I picked my jacket up off the chair and gestured out of the bullpen.
Why don't we take a walk, Mr. Israel?
We shook Steels by just not being where logic told her we should be. Digi dragged me up to the top of a lamppost and we squatted up there.
I contacted Lenora to get something to ward off the hunter. And he killed her before she could act to help. He wouldn't have done it if she couldn't help. Is her shop locked down? It's a crime scene, Digi. We haven't released it yet, but you might talk to Leah, she's in town and I assume she'll either take over or sell out her sister's shop. What were you looking for? Blessed Star Rock, specifically. Something to ward my apartment doors. I really think you need to take a good look at Dani. I met her eyes on the way over here. It wasn't pleasant.
I swung my legs from the lamppost while Digi held onto my shoulder to keep me from falling.
How do you mean, not pleasant? You know me, I can stare longingly into a man's eyes all day, but 2 seconds in hers and I couldn't keep looking. Demons aren't used to being the one who breaks eye contact.
Digi looked away. I had something to think about when I shimmied back down the lamppost and went back inside. Ted and Dani were still at my desk, drinking coffee that Steels had given them while she gently interrogated them. Ted was still wearing his dark glasses and Dani's eyes were the same unearthly elven blue. Steels was staring at Dani's eyes when I walked in, with Digi right behind me. The lieutenant looked to me then.
Mr. Lawrence says he has a long association with you, Michaels. He does, we've known each other for about 15 years.
Ted looked at me gratefully at interfering. Police make him nervous, he's only comfortable with me because he knows the truth, and we went through hell together. I hung from the chains, silver blood streaming down my back. The whipping had been only the beginning of what I would suffer at the Winter Queen's hands. My hair had been unbound and was sticking to the deep whip slashes on my shoulders. Ted was unhurt, and staring in horror at my wounding. The Queen glanced at him and then blatantly examined him, head to foot.
Why did you come to our realms, human?
Ted looked away from me, shallow breathing and in massive pain, to the fairy Winter Queen.
My daughter. You killed my wife and you took my daughter. Why?
The Queen laughed.
We need no reasons. We are the Fae.
I forced myself to talk, stretching up on my feet to relieve the pressure on my chest.
Dragon shit, Your Majesty. You don't do anything without a reason, just like us. Just give us back the girl, and I will take the humans away and out of Faerie.
The queen looked to me.
Your input means nothing, as you are already dead, elf.
Ted was vibrating with anger now. The open-handed threat and dismissive attitude were starting to piss him off. I could only watch as a warrior burst out of the shell of a mere man. Steels let me go. I promised to return in time for the Mies report on Lunara de Gaul and took my merry band home. Digi had gotten Star Rock after all. He grinned at me as he smeared the edge of the powdery stone of Faerie around my door frame.
Leah was a very nice lady, I hope she takes over Lunara's shop. Is it properly blessed?
I took part of the rock and started warding my windows. Ted clutched Sendalus. I had never, in almost 16 years, asked him where he had gotten one of the ancient blades of Faerie. He had had it when I found him, without a clue how to use it. After our escape, I had trained him how to properly use both the blade and its magic. Since the first time he had made Sendalus power work, he could have killed both of us. Ted Lawrence threw off his Faerie guards like they were nothing. He was a man, stronger than any Fae, and was just now realizing it, with his daughter in real danger. Sendalus mystically leapt to his hand and the Winter Queen backed away in terror as Ted drew the blade, its light and power flooding the room. I turned my head and closed my eyes against the power. When I hit the floor, because Ted had unlocked the chains that suspended me, we were the only things in the room. The Faerie had fled screaming from the sword. I grasped his forearm in a warrior's grasp as he helped me off the floor.
We have to find your daughter. All right, what can we do now?
Ted had his daughter next to him.
We lay low, until the hunter tries again.
Digi spoke up.
Don't you have to go back to work? Yeah, and the hunter won't try again until dark.
Digi, Ted, and Dani were relatively safe, warded by Star Rock. I got up, settled my gun and badge and left the house again. I needed time off to deal with this, I swear. Back at the precinct, I was starving. I hadn't eaten breakfast, and I hadn't eaten lunch. Somebody had left a basket of cream cheese and bagels on a desk, and I grabbed 2 bagels and a tab of cream cheese. Steels waved at me, while Jameson trotted over.
Something up with you, Lane? No, I'm good. Just some problems with a friend. Nothing I can't handle. If you need time. I'm fine.
I hit my desk and found the Mies report haphazardly on my in-basket. Paging through, there were no surprises. She had been decapitated first, and then disemboweled post-mortem. It was the standard way the Wild Hunt executed its targets. Nothing had been found on the body to indicate a killer, no surprise there. It was unhelpful as anything could be. I needed to see Lunara's body. I tucked the folder under my arm.
Hey, Lieutenant, headed over to the county morgue.
She waved me off as she focused on talking to someone on her desk phone. I smiled at the Mies assistant.
Now, what did you not put in the report?
The Dwarven Strom Bloodaxe aka Nathan Charles looked at me.
I presume you know she was killed by the Horned One. Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Strom shook his head.
Why is he here? I think it all has to do with Dani Lawrence, somehow. The Fairies want her, and I don't even know why. They took her as an infant, and her father braved Faerie itself to get her back. How old is the human girl now? 15. She is at the age of blossoming, if she were Fae.
I turned from Lunara's mutilated body to give Strom my full attention.
She is, isn't she?
Strom nodded.
You're sure she's human, Your Highness? She has Fae eyes, but that's a product of being swept off to Faerie as an infant. She's human.
Strom seemed to doubt me as he pulled a sheet back over Lunara's body, saying a dwarven blessing over her.
Maybe you ought to cut her, make sure she bleeds red, Your Highness. The Fae are tricky bastards, no offense. I prefer not to do that. None taken, Strom. You may learn the answer if you do.
Strom escorted me out of the morgue. At the lobby, I stopped him.
Wait, was there any sign Lunara tried to use anything to defend herself? Star Rock, of course. It didn't work, but her hands and face were powdered with it. She used Star Rock and it didn't stop him.
Strom didn't have the chance to confirm for me. I was out the door and headed for home. I squealed to a stop outside my house and leapt out. As far as I could tell, nothing had happened. I drew my gun anyway and headed for the house. I knocked heavily on the door before calling.
Digi? Are you guys alright?
The door opened, and Dijiraeli blinked at me, my gun held at a low ready and clutched in my hands.
We're good, Tieras, geez, calm down already.
I holstered the pistol and stepped inside.
We need to take the Lawrences elsewhere. The Star Rock isn't safe. Lunara guarded herself with it, and still got killed.
Dijiraeli got a hard look and called back into the depths of my house.
Ted, Dani, we got to go.
The tired-looking father and daughter came out, carrying their bags, and Ted had Sendela slung on his back. Ted was confused, he had had the misfortune of being dragged to and fro by a scatterbrained elf and Incubus.
But, I thought Star Rock was impervious to the shaded. Normally, it is, but the Winter Court is obviously not playing by the rules.
I ushered them to my car. I drove in circles, trying to think of somewhere that would be safe, knowing that at some point we'd have to stop running and start fighting. Digi looked behind us, clutching the bag of Star Rock he had gotten from Leah Degal in his hands.
I may have an idea on where we can go, but you won't like it, Your Highness.
I gave Digi an aggravated glance.
As long as it's somewhere we can make a stand. Okay, but I told you won't like it.
Digi gave me directions to where he wanted to go.
I can't freaking believe you're going back to this guy.
I slammed the car door shut as we all got out of the Torino.
I told you wouldn't like it.
Digi walked up the marble steps of Damien Van Wallaver's estate.
You're going back to the sorcerer who summoned you. And abused you for power. I'm a demon, and an incubus, that's what we're for, my prince. Don't think I didn't abuse him right back.
I didn't want to hear the details, and Ted covered Dani's ears as Digi knocked on the heavy oak doors of Van Wallaver's mansion. The door opened and pinch-faced butler met us. He nodded placidly.
Dijiraeli, it has been a long time since you returned. I will tell Damien. Tell him we need help, and I'm willing to deal.
I crossed my arms and looked unpleasant. The butler gave a quick look at me.
And him? That's up to him, Jolson. If the prince wants to offer his name to Damien.
The butler, Jolson, nodded and waved our motley little group inside. As the door closed, he gestured to a pleasant sunny room off the foyer.
Wait here, Master Van Wallaver will see you shortly.
As we waited, Dijiraeli was bouncing up and down nervously. I asked,
something wrong?
Digi gave me a dark look.
I'm making a deal with my summoner. And I hate taking a female form, it's aggravating.
I gave a glance where Dani was watching us. Ted had a dark look, how innocent did he think a 15-year-old girl was, anyway? Then Damien Van Wallaver walked in, impeccably dressed in Armani, Gucci, and a real Rolex. He had taken the power given to them in his deal with Dijiraeli and had benefited greatly from it. I had never been brave enough to ask the powerful sorcerer what being the primary target of an incubus was like. Damien adjusted his suit's jacket cuffs and addressed us.
What a surprise. Dijiraeli Outer Saucier, and Detective Lane Michaels, and who are your friends?
Dani beat her dad to the punch.
I'm Dani Lawrence. Ted Lawrence, Donnie's father.
Digi interrupted.
We need somewhere safe to put them, somewhere guarded against the fair folk.
Damien rubbed his chin.
That's a tall order. What would I get in return?
Digi gestured around the house.
You need more power, I can do that. You want a woman to put Helen of Troy to shame, I can do that. Why do they need safe shelter?
I spoke up. Damien looked at me instantly. He knew from the first time he met me I'm not quite human, and has been lusting after my name ever since he figured out I was Summer Court royalty. He'll have my full name when the underworld comes to the mortal plane.
15 years ago, the Winter Queen kidnapped Dani, killed her mother, and whisked her off to Faerie. I helped Ted get his daughter back. Now, the Horned One and the Wild Hunt are here, hunting for them. They can breeze past star rock barriers and Lunara Degal was murdered for helping us.
Damien took a step backward like we were nuclear. Which we were, in a manner of speaking. But then, he figured that he could handle this.
Upstairs. My study. It's warded against anything up to the Queen of Summer herself.
I looked at my watch, and knew I had to go back to the precinct. I should have been a pie.
Digi, I have to go. Keep Ted and Dani safe.
The Incubus nodded solemnly as the three of them followed Damien. Jameson came at me the moment I walked in.
Did you get anything on the Degal murder? What did the me say?
I lied with easy elegance. One great thing about my elven nature fading, I don't have to twist words anymore, I can lie like a rug.
The usual, we won't get any farther on this until the lab rats finish their tests.
Steels walked by, and shoved a folder into my hands.
Body found washed up on the North River's bank in Little Germany, Michaels. Coulson from the crime lab is heading the investigation side. Your lead.
I hate my job. I took the folder and smiled.
Lane Michaels on the case, Lieutenant.
I called Digi on my hands-free en route.
Yeah, I went back to the precinct and Lieutenant Steele shoved a new case at me. Think it has to do with the wild hunt?
I heard Ted, Dani, and Damien playing a game in the background.
No, just a floater in the North River.
I hung up and drove for the riverside. The body had been submerged for several days, and was bloated and fish-bellied. The me was examining it while Coulson took pictures and samples.
Ugly case, hey, detective.
I stood with my hands behind my back as I examined everything before pulling on gloves and booties.
Not the worst I've seen, Coulson.
In comparison to what was going on in the shaded world, I felt aggravated to be dealing with a mundane homicide. I let the me explain the body while I examined it with my own eyes.
Preliminary examination says he drowned, Detective Coulson. Samples of the North River for diatoms and salinity, on it. Good boy, Mr. Coulson. As I was saying, Detective, drowning is difficult to conclusively prove as a cause of death. I'll have to eliminate several other things to be able to rule this an accident.
I kneeled down to look at the body. The skin had mostly sloughed off after being completely waterlogged.
He's been in the water for days. It'll be hard to get fingerprints.
The me sucked his teeth.
I'll try to get enough of a print for an ID, but best we can do is try to identify him and go from there. I'll talk to missing persons and see if anybody matching his description turns up in their files.
The me bagged the body and I walked up to Coulson.
Anything to add on the spot?
Coulson pointed to the spot where the body had lain.
The little fish.
I blinked at them.
What about them? There's a lot of dead fish around the body, they must have washed up with him. Some kind of toxin. Could be coincidence, could be from him, we won't know until the tests come back.
Coulson bagged up the fish and I walked to my car. 2 new murders on my plate, and the thrashes of the shaded world. It was more than I could handle. I walked into the precinct, afraid Steels was going to hand me another case, but the day shift was trickling away, and I plopped down at my desk in the bullpen unmolested to start writing up a case report. I was typing up the me's initial statements when I sensed I was being watched. I looked up to meet the eyes of a stranger in uniform, with shiny police captain's bars on his uniform's collar. He nodded his head at me and disappeared into the hallway. Helpless with the failing of both elves and humans, curiosity, I got up from my desk and followed into that hallway. Around the corner, there was nothing there, no place the stranger wearing captain could have gone. I looked around the dingy hallway and felt very, very human. Jameson saw me on the way out as I was signing out with the desk sergeant.
Hey, Lane. What you doing after work? Sorry, can't hang out with you. Family stuff. You don't have a family, oh, never mind.
Jameson was looking to the glass double doors of the station, and I turned to see what had got his attention. Damien Van Wallaver stood there, having just come in. He looked at me steadily, speaking in his cultured way.
Detective Michaels, my limousine is waiting.
Jameson gaped. I waved goodbye and followed Damien out. The limo was very, very nice.
So this is what you get when you summon demons.
I was sipping a fine wine, Damien had insisted I drink.
I was aiming for a female, detective. I was surprised when Dijiraeli materialized in the summoning circle. Oh, I imagine you were.
I hid my mean grin behind the wine glass.
You've had a few hours around the Lawrences, do you have any idea why the Winter Queen wants Dani? Are you and her father sure she's human?
Instead of the automatic answer, I let myself think about it, drifting back a decade and a half. I lit the way down the passage with a purloined torch as Ted walked behind me, awkwardly holding Cendulus in sweaty hands, the sword glowing as bright as my torch, but the light didn't travel enough to be of use in the hallway.
You're sure Dani is in these passages?
I growled under my breath and brushed a long hank of white hair away from my eyes, tucking it behind my ears.
I know she's in there, because these passageways are where any Fae puts prisoners.
It wouldn't take long before the fairies who had fled from Cendulus would return to the torture chamber and realize Ted and I were gone. My back stung horribly, my wrists were raw from the iron cuffs and I was not in the best of moods. That was when a dragon lunged out of nowhere and struck at us. I pulled steel and called a warning.
Ted. Dragon.
Ted jerked and fumbled the enchanted blade up into something like a fighting stance. He was lucky that the beast hit the end of the chains that bound it as I backed away from the snarling beast.
Identify yourself, dragon.
The beast snarled, then relaxed into a more civilized appearance when it realized I was an elf.
I am Loro the Thar, Crown Prince of the Spring Court. I am a prisoner here, and who be you? Tieras Faerie, Prince of the Summer Court. We are prisoners as well, and here to rescue a changeling child. The girl infant?
Loro the Thar rumbled.
Free me of my bonds and I will aid your cause, Prince Tieras.
I hesitated. The four courts doesn't always get along, but what the hell? I had nothing to lose, being dragged off to the dragon's territory would get me out of the Summer Queen's reach for a while. Making my decision, I addressed Ted.
Watch the corridor closely, I have to free Prince Loro the Thar.
I raised my sword over my head and brought it smashing down on the chain. The elven steel cut through the chain like butter and Loro the Thar reared up, shaking off the stiffness of his thick muscles as he turned around to reveal the chamber he had been chained in front of. Laying in a crib inside a fairy circle, was an infant girl, with dark hair and fey blue eyes. Ted rushed past me before I could warn him and I was right behind him.
Dani.
He grabbed her out of the crib, and cried out in pain. Deadpan.
I was about to warn you that your daughter was warded inside a fairy circle, and there's a defensive spell around her against humans.
Dani started to scream as she thumped back onto the crib. Behind us, I heard her.
Well, all my prisoners in one room.
I turned to face the Winter Queen. Damien had to shake me out of this one.
You with us, detective? Oh, yeah, just thinking back to when I helped Ted retrieve Dani. I know her eyes are fey, but that was an effect of being held in a fairy circle and warded.
He sipped the fine wine.
As long as you are sure of that, Detective Michaels.
I was sure Dani was human, and yet humans could be just as special as any elf or fairy in their own way. The house, strike that, mansion, was undisturbed. Ted, Dani, and Dijiraeli were not playing the game they had been earlier. They were all three sitting, poker back straight on a couch. Ted looked ready to blow. I hung up my jacket and propped myself on a chair.
Spit it out, Ted.
Dani interrupted her dad.
We,
Ted tried to continue on like Dani hadn't interrupted him.
Are a little tired of being jerked around and moved around like two sacks of potatoes. Now, the answer to this crapped up situation would seem to be in Faerie, so I'm going back to the circle I used 15 years ago and go get some answers from the damned Winter Queen. You can come along, or not, Tieras.
I braced myself to make Ted see sense. He had been lucky 15 years ago, and he had had an elven prince at his back, and a dragon prince on the escape.
Ted, wait a minute.
While Ted was waiting for me to continue, Dani interrupted.
Why do they want me?
Before I could answer, she kept talking.
We have to answer that question, or we're just going to run in circles until Gwyn AP Nut gets around you guys and kills Dad and hauls me off somewhere.
Dijiraeli and Damien stopped dead on the stairs. I stiffened up from the chair.
How do you know the name?
Dani blinked.
You must have told Dad or something, and he told me.
I focused on Dani, and her fey blue eyes. I had always, for some reason, never actually looked the teenager in the eyes in 15 years. I found out why I had instinctually never met Dani's eyes dimmed fast. End of chapter.